If you're a writer dreaming of becoming a successful author, join me, writing coach Karena Akhavein, on the How to Be an Author podcast, your weekly source for writing information, inspiration, and motivation. As an author, you're well aware of the power of words, but most often authors are focused on the written form of a word. They are much more comfortable typing away, having their words appear on the paper or the screen. And when it comes to using their actual voice, that's where they get a little bit less comfortable. But using your voice as an author can be really useful for quite a few things. So these are all things that we're going to be discussing in this episode. Writing effective dialogue, communicating with other writers or with other people about our book, and also using the power of word of mouth marketing when it comes to marketing your book. As a little bonus, we're going to be talking about how to successfully navigate a writer's conference, because this is one of those things that many writers will come to me and say, hey, I've heard about these writers' conferences. Is it worth it? How do I get the most out of a writer's conference? Don't you worry, I've got you covered. So it's going to be writing skills, it's going to be mindset and productivity skills, and it's also going to be business and marketing skills for your writing career. Let's get started. I'm writing coach Karena Akhavein, and it is my job and my passion to help writers like you go from idea to published in the best way possible without having these blockages popping up, without giving into resistance or anything like that. So let's dive into this very important episode. So let's start off talking about the craft of writing. As usual in this season of the podcast, I'm going to be talking about real interactions I've had with writers like you. And our first author is Fatima. And Fatima was having issues with writing dialogue that really sings. She felt like her dialogue came off a little stilted, a little contrived, or maybe that it had pacing that wasn't quite working. So this was something that Fatima and I had to discuss. As a writer and her writing coach, I really needed to fix this before it started weighing her story down. Here's the thing, dialogue does so many things in your book. Not only does it really help your pacing, it breaks up these long parts of narrative, these long pieces of description. It is a little bit snappy. It's a great way of giving your reader some background information without info dumping. And it's a fantastic way of getting us to see firsthand what your character's voice is like and what their personality is like and how their interactions are like with the other characters in their lives. So as you can see, dialogue does so many things. So it's no surprise that Fatima and many other writers that I know come into some difficulty. They start to realize how crucial it is to get this right, and they have a feeling that maybe it's not quite right. So I wanted to address this in a very concrete, helpful way so that you can start seeing what dialogue is supposed to do and how to do that correctly. So usually in general, I have to say that when I see dialogue from my authors, especially novice authors, but some much more experienced authors, the temptation is to write dialogue that is way too long. If you think about a real conversation that you're having with people, yes, sometimes you're going to be explaining something and you'll be talking for a while, or you're going to be lecturing someone, but often dialogue's broken up because it's like a little tennis game, right? You're going to lob something, hit something, spike something, and there is a different back and forth that happens. And this creates this kind of tempo or this kind of pattern to the dialogue that really rings true. So most of my writers, when they come to me, they've got these long portions of dialogue that are way too expository, right? Expository is when you're explaining something and showing something. So this is that whole telling, not showing part. Remember that when you have dialogue, you don't only have a person speaking. You have their body language. You have what they're saying and what they're not saying. You have how the other person's receiving that information. So remember not to count too much on the expository part of the dialogue, and instead to have all those other cues as well. I think that this really helps. So think about a character saying something, the other character responding or not. Think about how the other character is acting, and your POV character, you can have how they're feeling when the other person's speaking as well, or when they are thinking of what they're going to say or not. So when we have a dialogue, it's not just what's in quotes, it's all of the descriptive stuff that's happening too. Also, all too often, when I have a writer showing me their dialogue, basically it's like the two characters stopped whatever they were doing and they're just kind of sitting in this white space having this conversation. When in reality, you're going to have dialogues with people as you do things, as you prepare dinner, as you drive to the gas station, or something like that, so that you can show the action of your story moving forward as the dialogue happens, in addition to having a conversation. So you're not stopping everything and ruining your pacing just to get this dialogue done. Other things to watch out for. Too many times, people are afraid that we don't know who's speaking. And so we have dialogue tags, right? He said, she said, Constance said, whatever. And too many times, some of my writers will write the person's name in the dialogue. So your character says, well, Bob, I think you're incorrect when you say that my mother was very cruel to you. Okay, let's look at that and dissect that, because that's something close to what Fatima wrote. And I changed all the names, don't worry, but she did write something like, well, name, I think you were incorrect when you said that your mother was upset, blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, the thing is, these characters know exactly what they're upset about, right? So think about the unsaid. You've got to find ways of kind of teasing this information to your audience without making the dialogue ring untrue. You're never going to tell your friend, hey, Bob, I know some people who do actually, and I've noticed that before, I get that. But whenever somebody does that, I think to myself, did they learn that in some marketing course? I think they did. And I find that quite funny, and I prefer not to do it in my books unless the character is angry and they say, well, Bob, that's something different. So think about the tone, think about the way your character would or wouldn't speak. Do you think they have some idiosyncrasies to their speech? Do they have a speech that's old-fashioned? Do they swear a lot? Are they super colloquial? All of these things are going to be great ways of giving your reader an idea of exactly what makes your character tick. And you can do all of that through dialogue. So one of Fatima's other issues was that all of her characters sounded. And once she started to realize that, she started to think, okay, my character is like this, this, and that. How would that make them speak? Or my character is OCD, for example. Maybe they have a little bit of a robotic sound. Or my character is ADHD. Maybe they talk really fast. Or my character was brought up in a boarding school. Maybe they've got some little expressions that they use that other people don't quite get. So think about the nuances of your character, and that's going to enrich your dialogue. And remember that you don't have to go over the top. Just a little bit of this is going to make your audience see, oh, this person's foreign, or this person's formal, or this person is educated or not. You don't need to just bash your reader over the head with that. And that's another mistake that a lot of writers make, is that they're going to add too many colloquialisms, or they're going to spell out your character's accent, or they're going to add too many foreign words or too many academic words. This cuts down on the ease of reading for your reader, and it's definitely not one of your goals. So definitely when you're rereading your dialogue, because so much of writing good dialogue is editing, because as I said, usually you're going to write, get it all down, and then you're going to edit it ruthlessly. I usually tell my writers to cut out at least half, maybe 2/3 of what they've written, because you can. More often than you think, you absolutely can do that. And when you're reading, look to see, is there any subtext in the dialogue? Is the dialogue too straightforward? Are the people spelling things out too much in a way that they wouldn't naturally? The next thing you can do, obviously, is to read your dialogue out loud. I know that this can be so awkward, but let me tell you, when I was recently recording an audiobook, I was reading my dialogue out loud, because even when I tell myself, read your dialogue out loud, I read it under my breath. And that's not the same thing. So when I was reading for my audiobook, all of a sudden I'm like, we're going to need to go back and edit this dialogue, because when it's really said out loud, as if you would on a stage, or as if you would when you're recording an audiobook, it suddenly comes out a lot differently. So make sure that that is, ringing true. And also think of the different tones that your speakers are going to have. Think about whether they're angry or they're happy, or how that impacts word choice and tone, and make sure to note that, because there's so many times when you've got something in your head and it doesn't come out that way. Like, you know how sometimes you're going to have a fight with your friend via text message because you wrote something and you didn't intend for it to come out that way and your friend misinterpreted? That happens all the time with writing your dialogue in your book as well. So make sure that it comes out as intended, with the different tags and different descriptions that you need to put in for that to happen. And definitely, anytime you can, eavesdrop on people. I mean, I'm not saying to do it in a creepy way, but I'm saying eavesdropping on really different types of people, different professions, different backgrounds, different locations, different moods, different times of day. This can really help to hone your ear, if you will, for what really good, powerful dialogue is. Now, one last thing to do when you're editing is reread your dialogue and tell yourself, is something changed after this dialogue? Is every line of dialogue absolutely necessary? So you're going to cut out things like greetings, things that are obvious, and ask yourself, what has changed between these two people, or what has changed in the information that's known? What has changed after this dialogue? Because if we just have two friends chit-chatting, and I have so many writers who write this and they love it because it's fun, right? But then they're going to say, well, I wrote this dialogue because I want the reader to know about the relationship between the friends. That's great, but something needs to be crucial to the story that we can find out only via this dialogue. I don't want them talking about pizza and having it be about pizza. They can be talking about pizza and have it being about a breakup, for example, yes. But talking about pizza and it being about pizza, that's not going to work out for me. So make sure that there's always a subtext, make sure there's always a purpose, and then edit, edit, edit. Those words, each one is crucial, and you don't want any wasted in your dialogue. I hope this helps. Now, let's move on to the whole idea of making a better book and communicating with those book professionals, communicating with other people such as your beta readers, your editor, potential agents, or random people who might want to read your book, or, your writing buddy. Let's talk about how you can communicate better to make your book as good as it can be. And then we're going to add in that special section about how best to attend a writer's convention, how to get the most out of those writing events. So there's a little bit of overlap here, of course, between the talking about your book and the whole word of mouth marketing thing. Because let me tell you, word of mouth marketing isn't just for random people out there. It also starts with the people you know. It's a beautiful thing when you're able to communicate about your book, and a friend of a friend of a friend is going to end up reading your book because you described it so well to friend A, and now here's friend D reading the book. That's pretty phenomenal. But let's talk about my writing client who was having a little bit of difficulty putting themselves out there, sharing details about their book. So many reasons for that, and so many ways that it really impacted them. And we're going to talk about how we got over those hurdles, because I think is very, very helpful. So writing client number 2, Allison, classic introvert. She had already lost some money because she'd put a deposit for a writer's conference that she had completely chickened out of at the last minute. And Allison came to me because she's like, I'm an introvert. I don't know why I should be talking about my book. And I don't know, I've been told I need to go to these writers' conferences, but what do I do there? What do I say? I can barely talk to my writing buddies about my book. And I was like, this is a blockage and a mindset that we really need to overcome, because in the long term, this builds on itself and it can become a real problem. Discussing your writing with others is such a crucial step. And I find that many authors, when they go from just a wannabe to somebody who's taking their writing really seriously, one of the first things that they need to overcome is writing just for themselves. They need to learn that there's an alchemy that happens with the words. They can't just be coming out of you and landing on a blank page and going nowhere. The words need to be received by somebody else, a reader. So that's the important thing to know. You can't just stay in your corner anymore. And I know you're probably a classic introvert, but this is a skill that can be practiced. It becomes easier and easier with practice. And the first place to really get that practice of talking about your own work in some really positive, helpful terms is a writing group or having a writing buddy. This is a supportive group where people aren't going to judge you. And if they do, if it's a good writing group, they're going to get kicked out. So I had a writing group for years. This is how I got many of my first clients as a writing coach. And that's what really paved the way for me to be learning about what are the pain points for most writers. And the way that happened was because these writers very generously and very freely spoke about the issues they were having with their writing, with their mindset, and with publication. So that's what started me building all these courses that I have now for writers. This is how the whole online courses for writers and creative and writing coach came about. This is where I got all of the ideas for how to best build my course from idea to published in 6 months. And this is how I got more and more experience working with all different types of writers, from playwrights to poets to fiction authors to memoirists. And all of these writers have the same issues when it comes to discussing their work and expressing it. So first of all, wrap your mind around the fact that writers in general are a supportive bunch. And if there's one who's not supportive, they're the butthole, not you. So just tell yourself that you can be in a safe place. Seek out safe spaces to discuss your writing with other writers. It's going to be so useful, and also to know that you're not alone. You're going to be gaining confidence as you go. And also, one thing you need to be gaining is a positive outlook about your writing. So if you find yourself engaging in any negative self-talk, I want you to stop that right now. And I want you to practice some of those positive mantras or positive self-talk, saying, I'm improving every day. I am learning and growing as a writer. I am doing the best writing that I can do, and I will keep getting better. All of those are great mantras or great self-talk that you can be practicing, whether it's in the mirror or behind the wheel. I want you to repeat these positive things to yourself. I know it sounds cheesy, but it actually works really well. So with Allison, she had, I can be an introvert, but I can also share my work with others because that's important to me. So that was her mantra. And I thought that was a beautiful one, because you can be an introvert, but really the magic of writing is when it's shared. So you have to come out of your comfort zone and learn how to share. And that's a growth and learning process that you have to go through. So speaking to a supportive writing group, and then we start to branch out. The first branching out that happens often is with our beta readers or our editor. And this is difficult because now we're not just sharing a little piece of our writing, and we're not just sticking to mainly positive feedback. We're actually giving our whole work to somebody who is there to give us a helpful critique. And so many times critiques can feel like criticisms. And of course they do. We're sensitive about our writing. And you'll hear this advice of develop a thick skin, and this is what you need to do. It's hard to develop a thick skin. And I think that as a writer, you think to yourself, well, if I'm growing this thick skin, isn't that going to cut down on how I experience the world and the emotions that I can express through my writing? And I think that you're absolutely right. A thick skin isn't really necessary. However, what is necessary is realizing that feedback can be amazingly helpful. We don't always see our book objectively. We, as I mentioned before with the dialogue part, we make connections, we bridge the gaps. We see our writing as something that is not exactly, we see it as what's in our head. Or sometimes we have the equivalent of body dysmorphia, but applied to writing, where we're like, my writing sucks, or we're like, my writing's awesome, when it doesn't suck or it's not awesome. It's probably somewhere in the middle, and that's fine, but you need to take this feedback to see how you can improve. The writer who's not constantly trying to improve and learn is really losing an opportunity to keep developing. That's the beauty of being a writer. Unlike being an athlete, where your skills are actually going to go down over time once your body starts breaking down, as a writer, until you lose this, you can keep getting better until much later on in life. And I think that that is one of the best things about writing. So remember to engage in positive self-talk, embrace the critique. And if it's cruel criticism, that's where you have to learn to be objective and say, you know what, that wasn't helpful. And I don't need to be hearing this sort of thing that was just mean or gratuitous. Learn the difference. So don't be reactive. Sit with any kind of commentary and try to see it objectively for what it is, right? Is it helpful or is it not? And when you have a critique or you have a suggestion, like I, for example, edit lots of people's work and I never just go in and change it. I actually always do everything as a suggestion because no matter what it is, my client might have a reason for writing it that way and they can look at it and be like, you know what? I can fix this a different way. And that's beautiful. I want you to maintain your voice. So remember that sometimes a beta reader is going to be like, well, I would have done it this way. Yes, they would have. You wouldn't have. But now, why did they say that? Can we maybe meet somewhere in the middle, or can we do things a different way so that it's more understandable or it's more appealing? All of those things are fair, but you also can stick to your guns, stand your ground, but not as a reaction. Very important. Now, a final skill when it comes to talking about your work and sharing your work, using your voice to start to improve your work is developing an elevator pitch for your book. It's super important to be able to tell people in just a couple sentences what's awesome about your book. So too many people, when they're developing an elevator pitch, they can't seem to boil their book down to just a couple sentences. And this is crucial, because you're going to lose people after the third paragraph of speaking about your book. And coming up with a really great elevator pitch is as simple as, and I say as simple as jokingly, because sometimes it takes me longer to create an elevator pitch than it does to write a few chapters, but it's as simple as telling people what's super awesome and interesting about your book. Why should they read your book? That's the only thing that they need to know in the elevator pitch. And oftentimes that's the only time you're going to get to communicate with a possible reader, possible editor, possible agent about your book. So learn to do this. The more you practice this, the better it's going to be. And we'll then be talking about the word of mouth marketing. This really enters into it because any person you talk to is a potential link in the chain of word of mouth marketing. So super important. And also when you go to a writer's conference, oftentimes your elevator pitch is your calling card. So let's talk now about how to make the best and get the most out of a writing conference or writer's event or something, a book conference, whatever it may be, someplace where you're going to have agents and publishers and other book professionals. How do you get the most out of it? This is the stuff that I coached Allison on as she's successfully decided to suck it up and get the courage to go to the conference after skipping the first year. And it doesn't just start at the conference. There's actually some preparation that happens before. So first of all, the elevator pitch for your work, if you have one, or if you have a work, you need an elevator pitch no matter what, but that's really, really crucial. Get that down, practice it in front of the mirror, do it until it is second nature. It might feel rote and robotic to you, but if it's a good pitch, don't change it. Just keep saying that. If you get a negative response to that, you can rework it, of course, but have that ready. Have it in your pocket. That's really important. Also, before the conference, you want to set your goals and expectations because these conferences are expensive many times and they're busy and they're overwhelming and there are lots of people there. So set a clear goal. Are there specific people that you would want to speak to and what do you want to say to them? What do you want to get out of this conference? Every writer has a different response. Some writers are like, I just want to go and see what's what. I want to see what other writers are doing. I want to see what's out there. I want to see what the trends are in publishing. All of those answers are cool, but maybe the answer is I want to talk to 3 literary agents and try to get them excited about my book. Also a great thing to do at a conference. You're definitely going to want to research the conference, who's going to be there, what's going down, what are the events that I want to do, where is everything? Like you want to feel really, really confident about what's happening and when, because again, Many times in these conferences, there are lots of things happening. There are different keynotes happening. There are different events, different book signings, and you don't want to get overwhelmed and then miss something while you're there. So for example, I went to South by Southwest a few years ago, and talk about overwhelming. And I really went over the whole, outline of what was going on because I wanted to make sure that I would get the absolute most out of my money. And I feel like I did. It was really, really great. I think that coming out of it, I had a lot of extra confidence and extra inspiration and motivation just from attending that and speaking to a few really important people. So that was great. And Allison, coming back from her conference, felt very much the same way. So that really works when you research ahead of time, come up with a game plan, but then don't beat yourself up if things happen. For example, maybe you're slated to go to this keynote, but then you bump into this amazing agent who wants to know more about your book. Well, let's weigh the outcome here. I think talking to the agent's going to be pretty life-changing if it goes well. And don't beat yourself up about the keynote. Maybe you can catch that author or that publisher or that editor at something else, or maybe you can read their blog posts or whatever it may be. But I think it's important to have priorities and plans. You're definitely going to want to have your materials at the ready. And by materials, I mean your elevator pitch, your business card, a bookmark maybe if you have one, and maybe a copy of your manuscript or your book. Maybe you want a flash drive or a contact card on your phone, something that you can distribute and have in case somebody says, hey, I'd love to talk about this some more, or I'd love to know more. You don't want to be like, I don't have any of that stuff. So that's really, really crucial. Don't shoot yourself in the foot by not being prepared. And they always give out these cute little tote bags at these conferences. You can be using those to tote your materials, but definitely have them organized and at the ready. Make sure that all of your bios on your social media profiles and your social media profiles themselves, make sure they're looking good. Make sure your website's updated. Make sure your LinkedIn profile looks good. Make sure that you look like the serious kind of author who's really there to make something happen. If you show up and you have to apologize about any part of your author platform, you are already at a disadvantage. So don't shoot yourself in the foot, and make sure that those very short little numbers of words, speaking of words, on your bio, make sure they are working for you, and make sure you're not wasting any words saying, sorry, that's lame, it's gonna get better. Nobody believes that. At the conference, you want to network strategically. You want to engage with the right people. So don't waste too much time chit-chatting with a person who seems really nice or really cute. That's great, but the important thing is don't lose sight of that plan that you had, the people that you wanted to talk to, the things you wanted to find out, the things you wanted to achieve, much more important than securing a date with the cute writer across the way. And I can't stress this enough, and this is something that Allison and I went over several times before she went to the conference. When you're an introvert, it takes it out of you to be forward facing, to be out there, to be surrounded by so many people, and to be talking to people and listening to people and taking notes and giving introductions. All of that is pretty difficult, and it can sap your energy. So make sure that you really protect your energy throughout the conference so that you don't crash or say something you would regret or freeze up or do anything weird because you're sapped or drained or that you're talked out. All of these things happen, and don't beat yourself up if that's you. And if you know that you have only a certain amount of interaction that you can handle, pace yourself. That's all I have to say. That's really important, to pace yourself. Now, it doesn't end at the conference. As you might have guessed, after the conference, there's a lot that you can do as well, right? Keep up the conversation. Reach out to the people that you conversed with, whether it's on social media or whether it's shooting them an email or whether it's following up on whatever you discussed. All of those things are great ways to make relationships happen within this whole writing and publishing industry. Every little bit helps. And also, if you made friends with a really cool writer, make sure to befriend them on social media, support what they're doing, and they're going to do the same to you. And they might help you with that word of mouth marketing that we're talking about. So now let's just dive into this word of mouth marketing, because I think it's so crucial. It's one of those pieces of the marketing puzzle that authors tend to bypass. They tend to just ignore it. They're thinking in terms of selling thousands and thousands of books, and they're thinking of doing that in terms of paid ads or social media or the algorithm, all of this stuff, which in fact, word of mouth can be exponential when you really think about it. This is the best way that you're going to start reaching more and more readers, many more than can be reached through any algorithm or through any social media account that you might have. And remember though, that through social media, you can create a buzz that will then turn into word of mouth. You're probably like, what is she talking about? Let's break it down. My client, Kendra, is a multi-passionate creative who's really into Victoriana and like steampunk, poison, cool outfits that the Victorians had or didn't have, all of that sort of stuff. And she's a fascinating individual. And she has written a few books that really didn't go anywhere, even though I think she's a great writer. She's super smart. And she was thinking to herself, why is my strategy not working? And I was like, because you have left word of mouth marketing fall by the wayside. So the first thing that I told Kendra was actually that she was selling herself short when it came to what she was doing to ensure this word of mouth campaign, because here are some of the things that she was doing right. First of all, she was writing like high quality books, and that's really important. Your book's got to be good for people to want to recommend it to their friends, right? They're not going to recommend crap to their friends. That's embarrassing. So she's writing these high quality books. She's also harnessing her early readers. So she did these advanced reader copies. Rightfully so, she actually spent a lot more money than I would have probably. But anyway, she sent off these advanced reader copies to a bunch of readers. And that was great because when you receive something, especially if there's an extra little bookmark in it, which she had done, she did a whole little package for the ARCs. And this made the readers even more likely to talk about her book amongst themselves. But the problem that she ran into was, especially in her social media and especially in the follow-up, she wasn't really giving those advanced readers or any readers or anyone who viewed her material a follow-up call to action. For example, if you're publishing an ebook, and I've made this mistake too, I forgot to put something at the end of the ebook saying, hey, please give this ebook a rating. And please go check out my other work. Go to my website, talk to your friends about this book. If they like this, if they like that, you need to tell people what to do because people have busy lives. People are distracted. They don't know. If you don't tell them, they don't even think about recommending your book to somebody else. Like I would say, depending on your book, you can make your call to action really go with your platform. So I told Kendra, you could tell people who are also steampunk or whatever, say, hey, why don't you dress up on your social media with your best steampunk outfit and hold my book up in the best costume, I'm going to reward you with, my next book for free or whatever. Like, let's see what we can do. And that's going to get people talking about the book because you're talking about also the subject and you've just given them a call to action to include your book in their everyday life, in something that they do that gives them an outreach and gives them an audience as well, because everybody has their own audience. How can we leverage your audience and the audiences of all the people who've read your book or about to read your book? Engaging with readers on social media, even if it's one by one, believe me that this has an absolute exponential effect. So if somebody doesn't really read, for example, in your genre, but they love who you are on social media, you're great at storytelling, you engage, and they've asked you a question in your comments a few times, and you answer that question every single time, they're going to feel much closer to you. They're going to feel much more likely to promote your work with other people. When they're asked, hey, what's a book that I should be reading? They're going to think of those positive interactions that they had with you. And they're going to think, you know what? I'm going to recommend Kendra's book because it was really enjoyable getting to know her on social media. I feel like we have a relationship now. So much more likely to recommend. Another thing to do with your social media, I was talking about this whole costume contest or showing off the cover. You know what that is? That is shareable content. So when you've got somebody who's interested in something and when your friend sends you funny memes or they send you cool pictures of things that they think you might like because you like dogs or you like vampires or whatever it might be, shareable content is where it's at, right? Shareable content is the social media equivalent of word of mouth. And the more people share your content, the more they're likely to talk about your work and the more likely it is to be discovered. So I've been talking about the social media equivalent of word of mouth. And also, for example, speaking about your book, much more powerful than writing a blog post saying, read my book, or much more powerful than a picture of your book on social media. So if you can be heard talking about your book, whether it's on a podcast or as the guest on a radio show, or if you're talking about your book at the local library, or if you're asked to join a book club, all of these things, they feel like they're really small little things, but believe me, that ends up having a really powerful effect. So I've participated in podcasts all around the world when it comes to my books, and I've also participated in writing groups. Now that you have Zoom, there's no excuse not to be present to talk about the book. You can have a little Q&A. I've done writing groups or book clubs in Australia, in India, in Sonoma, Napa, Santa Barbara, all different places where it's been so fun to also not only talk about your book, but hear reader reactions to your book. It gives you so many ideas as to what you need to focus on in the next books and what's important to readers, your readers. That's the most beautiful part. Once people are reading and they're talking to you, it's such an opportunity to make them feel even more aligned with you and even more likely to recommend your book to somebody else. So I had somebody recently who read my book in one of her book clubs, and she recommended it to another book club, which I thought was genius. I was like, thank you. That's 12 books that are going to be sold all at once that wouldn't have been before. And when I talk about 12 books being sold, when you're an indie author, every 12 books makes a difference. Every one book makes a difference. You just want to get more readers because there's a chance that you're going to get that one reader who is an influencer in their community, and they're going to be pushing that book of yours. And all of a sudden, you didn't know that in this one book club, there's this one person who happens to have a massive platform somewhere else, and now they're talking about your book. And now your book explodes. So just keep pushing. Never give up when it comes to word of mouth. This is something that is so powerful. My friend Kendra has been really working to harness this, and we're already seeing some payoffs when it comes to her book really getting out there more and more, and also her communicating what her world is. So I find that super cool. So that's it. I hope this really helped. So remember, we're talking about dialogue, using those words from your characters to really add something significant to your story without weighing it down. Think about how you can make your dialogue as resonant as possible, edit the crap out of it. Also, using words to describe your book and to make more relationships within the writing world, and preparing yourself for a writing event of some kind, a writer's conference, super important. I would love to know if you've participated in one of those recently, or if you're thinking of it. Call me, your writing coach, and let's have office hours and let's discuss how you can best capitalize on these wonderfully valuable events and how you can make your voice heard as an author. And finally, word of mouth marketing. If you haven't been focusing on this very powerful aspect of book marketing, you have been missing out. I hope this inspired you to try to implement some of these ideas. And I can't wait to be with you next time as I explore a whole other theme and talk to you about a whole other group of my writer clients on the How to Be an Author podcast. And also, if you want some help with your writing, or if you want an easy workbook to take your book from idea to published, check out my website, Online Courses for Writers. You will be thrilled with what you find there. It's going to be so valuable. Can't wait to see you next time. Thanks for joining.
If you have any pressing writing-related questions or would like to be featured on the How to Be an Author podcast, please feel free to reach out on my website, creativeandwritingcoach.com.